Carl Jung described alchemy as the dream from which science was born.
The dream of alchemy, of turning base metals into gold, if it was only that, then the Philosopher's Stone would be a broken idea.
Right.
But it's not only that. It's the conference of eternal life, spiritual peace, good health.
And so the Philosopher's Stone are going after that. It's the transcendence or the evolutionary process itself.
The scientific method is an excellent system, but it's also being corrupted like everything else. It's sort of lost this purity.
Yeah, the aim is the pursuit of truth. And so obviously it's been corrupted in fiat world where we have insane things like don't question the science.
And I think that's been a theme throughout this entire book, that there's no way that any of this actually works without us as individuals already doing the self-work.
I mean, when I read this, I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, how could this be written? Literally all opposites, right? It was base, cheap, immature, and volatile, but also perfect, precious, ancient, solid, visible to all, yet mysterious, costly, dark, hidden, and evident, having one name and many names. What else could possibly fit that description?
And somehow we live in the era when this is becoming evident.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's WolfNYC, WOLFNYC.com.
Alchemy can be most simply understood as the attempt to produce the Philosopher's Stone, the Lapis Philosophorum. The Lapis Philosophorum had the ability to turn base metals into gold. Furthermore, it conferred upon its bearer immortal life, spiritual peace, and good health. The alchemical procedure stretched some 20 centuries, in the West coming to an end with Isaac Newton. It had an equally lengthy and elaborate history in the Orient. It is impossible to understand the essence of alchemical thought or its relevance for modern psychology without entering into the categorical system of the alchemist. The stuff, quote-unquote stuff, with which the alchemist worked, although bearing the same name, was only vaguely akin to our modern matter. There are many ways to cut the world up, and they are not necessarily commensurate. Much of what the alchemist considered thing, we would not think of as characteristic of the objective world. Furthermore, what he considered unitary, we would think of as evidently diverse. So that's just to start us off with alchemy.
Beautiful. That's on your book, page 407, and my PDF 417. And yeah, so what people typically, you say the word alchemy and people think, oh yeah, those crazy guys a long time ago that tried for the longest to turn lead into gold, right? And so people use this kind of like the word myth in modernity has become synonymous with untruth. The word alchemy has become synonymous with like things that don't work, right? People will say, oh yeah, that's alchemy, or, you know,
Even pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience, yeah, exactly. However, it's not true, right? Just like mythology is not untrue. It's like hyper real or hyper true in a lot of ways, as we've talked about. Something akin to mathematics, but for the subjective domain rather than the objective domain. Something that's like a distillate of human experience across time. Alchemy has also a very interesting history that contradicts quote unquote conventional wisdom about it. And that is that, which we're going to get into, there is a whole tradition. I don't know what we call this exactly. It's like a pseudo religion, but it's Carl Jung described alchemy as the dream from which science was born. So it was like a fork off of traditional religion that developed this methodology of performing experimentation in the laboratory of nature. It also involved refining. The belief was you had to refine oneself to refine one's discoveries in nature. And this became the proto-science, if you will. Like, it led to the development of the scientific method, and chemistry is obviously where we get chemistry from the word alchemy. And so there is some grain of truth in that, yeah, there was this pursuit to discover the Philosopher's Stone, right? Which was many things, and we'll get into what a lot of those things were, but it's popularly remembered as the thing that turns base metal into gold. And so there's some truth to that, as he says here, but it's really more about the process, right, that allows us to turn base metals into gold. And it's also, gold is a bit metaphorical because it's also the process by which you refine yourself to discover spiritual gold. And so there's this kind of as above, so below thing occurring, which Peterson later refers to as intrapsychic integration, right? Like we get, we clean up our room, proverbially, we get right in our mind and ourselves and our actions. And the external manifestation of that is social integration. So that intrapsychic integration becomes the below to the social integration as the above, essentially. And the process that facilitates all of that is somehow bound up in or represented by the Philosopher's Stone. And so when I first read this, I was probably the year 2019, I think, maybe 2020. So I was a little bit into the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And a lot of the things we'll go into today, I will highlight where I saw parallels between the Philosopher's Stone and alchemy more generally and Bitcoin. And my view is that Bitcoin actually could be the Philosopher's Stone. And so the first thing I want to say about that is a tweet that I wrote. So this idea that we can turn base metals into gold. The first thing that's important to know is that we actually can already create gold in a lab today. It's already possible to create artificial gold in a lab. However, we cannot produce gold at a cost below its market price. Now, the point you could do that, you would basically destroy gold as money, because you could produce gold more cheaply in a lab than it sells for on the open market, so its scarcity would be compromised, and therefore it would no longer store value across time, or store purchasing power across time. And so this is now in the domain of hypothesis, but I think Bitcoin could actually create the conditions where this is possible. And so the tweet that I put out reads the following. I said, gold can already be artificially produced, but not yet at a cost below its market price. one of the many mind-blowing aspects of Bitcoin is that it functions as a global bounty program for bringing more cost-effective energy sources into production. How ironic will it be if Bitcoin drives the cost of energy so low that lab-grown gold can be produced below its market price, thereby compromising gold's utility as reliably scarce money and thus destroying its store of value functionality. So if this occurs at some point, then I think that would sort of cement Bitcoin as the Philosopher's Stone. There might, I guess the counter argument would be, oh, how could we say that it was Bitcoin that brought the cost of electricity that low? And maybe there could be arguments that that wasn't the contributor, but if you understand how Bitcoin mining works, it's pretty evident that those who can produce cheaper energy outcompete those that do not in the mining process. So therefore, it is this global perpetual incentive to bring more cost-effective energy sources into production. And so if we play that game out far enough, eventually we're going to destroy gold as money, basically, through the Bitcoin mining incentive system. So I'll leave it at that. I think you had something you wanted to say too about central banking as being opposite to the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, sure. So no, I think introducing these concepts first of all is interesting. I mean, this stuff is totally foreign to what we think of today. But as you were saying, we do have all of these roots. Alchemy literally being the chemie, the becoming the chemistry eventually, right? But the thing is, I think the difference is understanding what the goals actually are, right? Because I think the attainment of creating gold out of other properties, right? That was a high goal because gold was considered so rare and so perfect, essentially. That I think we'll read a couple of passages just on what the meaning of gold actually is. I think that's useful for us to cover here. But the point with that is that ultimately it would destroy the properties that make gold useful as money, right? Which seems interesting. I don't know if anyone had actually thought of that if you could create gold, that would actually destroy it. And maybe there's a paradox there in terms of that you can't actually ever get anything for free in the world, that as soon as you do, it destroys the scarcity and the value. So those are just some interesting first thoughts that I've got. And
that paradox too is interesting, that again, you see how strong the monetary incentive is for engaging in productive activity, right? Like people were literally pursuing, the most precious thing in the world at the time, which was gold. They're trying to figure out how can we produce more of this thing. And that led to this whole idea of spiritual purification and, systematic methodological exploration of the world through the scientific method that becomes science, that becomes, all of the things, right? Chemistry, biology, economics, computer science, like all of these things sort of branch out from that. And then ultimately we get Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin is this, it's an amalgam of many of these things. You probably say at least economics, computer science, game theory, psychology. You could also say, monetary history, all of these things that we've learned, even chemistry in a way, right? Like you have to understand the chemistry of gold to understand why it's good money. And so it's an interesting thing. I go back to that description from Carl Jung. It's the dream from which science was born. And so it's as if, the mind-blowing thing about this is like, it's as if we had to dream up or envision something like Bitcoin, even though obviously it couldn't be described as Bitcoin. We're just trying to describing the aim that we're going for thousands of years, and to work towards this aim, and eventually that is the recipe that makes it a reality.
Well, the funny thing about this is that the dream of alchemy of turning base metals into gold, if it was only that, then the Philosopher's Stone would be a broken idea.
Right.
But it's not only that.
Yeah.
It's the conference of eternal life, spiritual peace, good health.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think the additional properties are what describe Bitcoin so perfectly, right? Because if it does turn base metals into gold, or in other words, if it literally enables creating as much gold as anyone can produce,
Right, it would
breaks money,
Yeah.
but it replaces it with the Philosopher's Stone turns into the money. Bitcoin turns into the Philosopher's Stone. It's great. It's such a good metaphor, and the placement in this book, by the way, just to sort of center us in where this is in this long series, it seems like a complete out of left field turn here, that this book is talking about all of this stuff about integrating the self and dealing with becoming the hero, becoming the savior, walking that path. And so this turn into alchemy seems out of place, but it's not. There's so much to the refinement of the self and doing that in a methodological way that we'll see. So I think that's really the relevance here. And well, just like we were talking before we started, I mean, we could go into every little bit of minutia in this 40 or so pages, and he's referencing Jung, Eliade a lot, and I'm sure those books have a lot more to say on the topic as well, the sources. But the thing is, I think that would be a little bit off point to go into every little bit of minutia there, and so I think we're going to focus on the points that are most relevant to what we've been covering in this series, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a ton of. It gets quite esoteric too, as you said, with a lot of these Latin terms, and it's very mythological, very dense, sort of. I don't want to say vague, but because it's using so much symbolic language that it's kind of difficult to follow at times, and but I think at the end of the chapter for me is where it all sort of comes together, and he's really. I guess he is then summarizing his understanding of alchemy and what it means, and that's where you get these pretty clear parallels to Bitcoin. So I don't know, do you want to go into some of this gold stuff first, and then we'll jump towards the end of the chapter?
Yeah, I think we might as well do that. I think the point here to just show what the definitions of gold is in the alchemy lens, I think that's going to be, well, it's going to instantly show that maybe instead of gold, it's actually really Bitcoin is the ultimate goal there. There's a quick passage about before just specifically gold that I think is a little bit of summation of earlier stuff. So if you don't mind, I'll just start there. So this is my page 413. The act of exploration produces or elicits discriminable phenomena. These phenomena are mapped by the episodic and semantic memory systems. The exploratory process, however, is guided by the maps produced by the episodic system, particularly by its maps of the future. A desired end is posited in fantasy. The motoric abstract exploration system endeavors to bring about a match between emergent phenomena produced in the course of activity and that map of the desired future. Mismatches between production and goal elicit reappearance of the base matter of the world, the unknown, manifest in negative affect, curiosity. The individual attempts to transform his wishes, rooted in the final analysis in emotion, into reality, suffering and learning when that process is disrupted. Exploration is deemed sufficient and may justly come to an end when the current affective state is deemed optimal. When knowledge, translated into action, has adjusted the world such that it is, once again, paradisal. I'll skip ahead just slightly, but the alchemical base matter of the world was therefore the stuff of which determinate experience, subject and object, was made, was something, in addition, capable of endless transformation, was something finally corrupt, as the material world was corrupt, incomplete, unrealized, fallen, and suffering. So just to wrap up a little bit of context of what this is, just a little bit, but that alchemy was the goal. The alchemy was the process of the user transforming his wishes, the alchemist transforming his wishes into action, into reality, and doing it through this process of exploration, which completely maps onto the mythological chaos order hero venturing into unknown system. So it's more, the thing is, it's rooting alchemy in all of these other processes that we've talked about already in the series. So this is just essentially the sort of the sum of the last 6 or 7 pages in my view here, and it gets to this kind of subject and object thing that subjects were working with objects, which I know is relevant on your side.
Yeah, so this is something that I think we've talked about it previously in the series, but it definitely bears repeating, and it's probably one of the most, I mean, there's so many mind-blowing things in the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but this one alone, I think, this is also pre-Bitcoin, but Bitcoin sort of enables this to make more sense, I think. Hoppe has a book, Economic Science and the Austrian Method, where he's talking about Mises as being really more than an economist and more of a philosopher, that he actually solved a problem that Immanuel Kant had not solved. And I believe this was justifying how a synthetic a priori proposition could exist. And so I know that sounds very confusing and technical, but basically, and I don't even feel qualified to go into the details on it, but the point that Hoppe makes is that human action is the primary category of experience, that everything is human action. And if you just investigate this intuitively, I think you'll find it to be true. Like, even things, there's some people would say, like, okay, force equals mass times acceleration. That's not human action. Obviously, that's some fundamental reality of the universe that we've discovered. And you could say, yeah, that's true to some extent, right? There is an independent reality, presumably, that's independent of human observation. That's how we investigate that reality through the scientific method, right? Which attempts to eliminate individual human bias or valuation from the process of interacting with reality. That's why repeatability of experiments is so important, documenting initial conditions and things like that. But the reality is ultimately that we only can discover or detect or develop force equals mass times acceleration as a formula through observation and experimentation and the recording of results across time, right, through mathematics. And all of this ultimately grounds out in human action. And so Hoppe's point is that, a point he makes in that book, he says that it is only through human action that mind and matter come into contact. And so I read that as, it is only through human action that subject and object come into contact. So subject and object, something that we take to be primary realities today, since it was, Descartes that said a few hundred years ago, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, I think is how he said it, that we have developed this fundamental categorical division, that we think there is a knower inside of our head and there is the known outside, what we can relate to. But reality is not discrete like that, right? These are just useful fictions that we use to contend with the complexity of reality, to decomplexify reality. The reality is we are in a continuous loop with nature, right? So that old philosophical saying, we are the universe observing itself, right? That obviously we are made of natural materials from a materialist standpoint, yet we're able to know things about reality, to observe reality, to interact with it and change it and all of these things. So we're in this continuum with reality rather than a discrete subject-object. And that continuum, I think, is most aptly described as human action. And then this, to go one level deeper than that, is like, that is Mises's, the axiom of action that Mises put forth, right? It's almost like it's the most fundamental thing we can say. I think this maybe goes so deep as to disrupt what Socrates said, where Socrates said, the only thing I know is that I know nothing at all. And I think there is one thing we can actually know, right? It's where knowledge really grounds out into reality. And that thing is that man must act, right? Man must use means to pursue ends. That is the only thing we can say with absolute certainty. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again just to complete the argument. The reason it's axiomatic, the reason it's an unshakable assumption or presupposition is that to try and mount any counter argument against the axiom of action is to use the means of argumentation to pursue the end of refutation of the axiom of action. So in thus trying to argue any argument, any propositional argument you could put forth against the axiom of action, you are through demonstration proving the axiom of action despite the explication or contents of your argument. So your actions are speaking louder than your words in any attempted counter-argument to the axiom of action. Therefore, it cannot be refuted, right? It's like an unbreakable language construct, and therefore it's the most accurate description of reality, and it's from which everything is born, basically, including subject-object duality. And so that's a lot, right? But Hoppe goes on to say action's the most primary category. He actually says the category that's second of second primacy to action is private property, which is interesting. I won't go into that now, but yeah, so anywhere I think where Peterson's saying this idea that the alchemical base matter of the world is the stuff of which determinate experience, i.e. subject-object, was made, I interpret that alchemical base matter of which experience is made is human action. And again, it's intuitively obvious. Name an experience that does not involve human action. Good luck, right? It's like it's almost identical by definition, right? Experience is human action. I mean, at least in the human domain. If you want to talk about animal experiences, maybe, but they can't communicate to that. They can't communicate that to us through language. So if you wanted to be more broad about it, you could say action, right? Presumably animals have means that pursue ends. We see squirrels burying nuts, and we see beavers building dams, and, they're obviously thinking about the future. So maybe this action category goes beyond just humans, but anyways, that would be my connection between the world of praxeology and alchemy.
It's a fantastic summary there, and I mean, I think the real connection here between these two things is important, right? That this base material of what the alchemist is sort of trying to work with. This is also akin to just the understanding of the world more generally. So this is like the layer of systematically exploring the world as it is, or at least sort of how Peterson would put it in earlier chapters. But yeah, so this subject-object determinate experience thing, I think the reason for kind of bringing this up here is that the actions being taken upon I'll step back here a little bit. The alchemist works with the domain of human action in that telling, the subject-object thing. So the alchemist then learns to understand the process of action, right. Subject acting on object, something like that.
Sorry, just to add to what you're saying here, we have to remember too that alchemy preceded Descartes, preceded cogito ergo sum, right? So it's almost like alchemy was inventing the categorical structure of subject-object to give rise to the scientific method. And so that's how, we have to get out of our own categorical thinking to go back, which is the point Peterson makes, to go back into the categorical thinking of alchemists to understand how it gave rise to subject-object. But so again, that pursuit eventually led us to praxeology, which is human action, which talks about what's prior to subject-object.
Yeah, and I mean, this is an interesting thing, right? This being a layer that preceded all the scientific stuff. If we are allowing that the sort of layer model that there is Christianity underpinning all of Western civilization, and before that, there's layers of other stories that are kind of underneath. They're this substratum under our own subconscious, right? Well, then this alchemy layer is underneath all of this scientific understanding and how humans understood the world. So going through the exercise of understanding what alchemy actually was is the exercise in taking the lessons out of this entire period of history and better understanding the substratum of how we got to the current way of doing things, which the scientific method is an excellent system, but it's also being corrupted like everything else in the current fiat world. Like, science isn't actually the pursuit of knowledge. It's got so much incentive add-on on top of it that it's sort of lost this purity, the purity of the goal of science. Scientists have to fulfill grant proposals, so the science has to be profitable. In other words, and science can be gatekept by if there is some form of exploration or inquiry that goes against current scientific dogma. Well, that can be easily shut down by the existing establishment through peer review systems, right? Like, science as it exists modernly might have a lot to learn from alchemy in terms of the pursuit of a goal and categorizing things based on their base parts. Maybe that's not exactly correct as we would understand it empirically, but maybe as a way of looking at things, there's something to learn there.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Example.
Sorry, I'll give you one thing, and I'll just let it up here. Science, as you're saying, this used to be indistinguishable from natural philosophy, by the way. So, and the aim is the pursuit of truth, right? And so obviously it's been corrupted in fiat world where we have insane things like don't question the science as being a meme during the pandemic. It's like, wait a minute. Science is a systematic method of questioning aimed at uncovering the truth. You can't say don't question the science. That's like, I don't know what that means. That's like saying I don't know. I don't have a good example, but it's insane. It doesn't make any sense. And it's interesting to me that, we end up at Bitcoin, right? So there was this pursuit of truth that emerged from alchemy. And then again, Philosopher's Stone being Bitcoin, well, it's also describable as truth in a way, right? Like, it's saying, it's this inviolable record-keeping system. So it's the most truthful thing we've ever created. Anyway, sorry, that was longer than I wanted it to be, but...
No, not at all. And the thing here is that the passage that I just read leads directly into a description of the category of gold. So I think now this is the example that Peterson is just going to give is gold, which I think is the thing that we're interested in exploring. So I think I'll just go ahead and read that.
Yes.
All right. Starting on page 413, my copy. Analysis of the pre-experimental category of gold helps shed light on the relevance, importance, and meaning of this archaic complex of undiscriminated ideas. Gold, as ultimate contrast to mere base matter, was the ideal as it could be perceived in the concrete world. For the pre-experimental man, as well as for the modern, gold served as a medium of economic exchange. But the value of the metal did not, and still does not, consist solely in its economic utility. Gold has always been associated in episodic representation with divinity. Prior to development of the scientific worldview, this association made perfect sense. Gold, in contrast to lesser metals or substances, quote-unquote lesser, does not tarnish, dull, or rust. It therefore appears imperishable, immortal, and incorruptible. Gold is rare rather than common. It shines like the sun, the evident source of life. The, quote, category of gold therefore tended to subsume everything Apollonian, sun-like, divine, in the patriarchal heroic sense we have become familiar with. And then he's going to go on to some quotes, but yeah, stop there. So he actually starts to hit on some things that we might be familiar with from other modern classics like the Bitcoin Standard, etc.
Yeah, I mean, and what I hear him roughly saying here is that gold is analog Bitcoin, right? It's like the physical precursor to Bitcoin, right? And again, he's saying it's in part, right? Not only was gold used as money, but he said it also has these other uses, which is interesting because gold does have other uses in the marketplace as well, right? It's an industrial metal that's used in part as an industrial metal, in part as money. But he's making the case that it's used in part as a symbolic representation of divinity, right? That it had this sort of transcendent quality and that it appeared to be imperishable, immortal and incorruptible. But again, only in part, right? Because it's also not. It's also physically represented. It can be destroyed, like by certain acids. And I think Bitcoin is just the purest representation of what gold was a partial representation of. So the trope, gold is analog Bitcoin, Bitcoin is digital gold, sort of bridges that understanding. And so, yeah, it's interesting, right? Like you mentioned the Bitcoin Standard, which goes into a purely economic exploration of why gold made good money, how gold was centralized, how and why gold was centralized, and how that led to the corruption of gold, really, which culminates in fiat currency. Peterson's doing another perspective on it here, saying, oh yeah, not only was gold obviously useful as money, useful as industrial metal, but it's also useful as this symbol for the alchemical pursuit. And that's why it wasn't just actually turning base metals into gold, which it was that, but it was also this thing like, the development of the spiritual gold and things like that he goes into.
Yeah, I think the key difference here for me compared to other descriptions of gold is this divinity thing, as you said. And the idea there is that it's linking the idea of gold to everything else we've been talking about, this idea of highest good and having an ideal goal to strive for. Mm-hmm. And so the alchemical pursuit actually isn't wrong. It's not paradoxical. It's striving for an ideal as opposed to just trying to create more of a scarce thing, which I can't imagine they would have understood the reasons why that would be a wrong thing. But then it makes the parallel to Bitcoin just so much more smooth, right? Because if all we're talking about, the industrial uses that get cited by gold bugs, right? If it's not the industrial uses, that's the special thing of gold. It's this divinity. It's this representation of a highest good. Well, then gold is completely understandable. It's the industrial uses, the gold will always be useful for in computers and as jewelry and stuff, and that being held over Bitcoin. Well, that stuff, it just always rings hollow to me. But if gold is this representation of divinity, well, then why don't we just find a better way of representing gold generally, right? A way of getting past the physical limitations of gold. Physical limitation of that literally more can be produced in the lab if you want, or more can just be gone and dug up from the ground by some enterprising company, or found in the mythical asteroid or something like that. If we can get beyond that, then we've got a new representation of divinity, and something that can provably not be counterfeited or debased or diluted. And so that just speaks to that if we can hold Bitcoin as this symbol of the highest good and do everything towards it, towards that highest good, and become the modern alchemists towards Bitcoin, well, then that's a fantastic goal, and it also is the evolution of gold. It's not a competitor. It's superior.
Yes.
And it's a competitor in the short term, but its superiority is clear. And so just this alchemical description of what gold is really solidifies the metaphorical understanding that the alchemists would have seen Bitcoin in the same way, basically.
Yeah, man, it's meta in a way, because I think gold itself symbolizes this evolutionary process, right? We're saying that, okay, there was a metal on Earth, it was shiny, people initially just wanted to adorn themselves with it, so it's a collectible. Then, because it's rare and exhibits these other qualities, then it becomes this store of value, right? So as the production of goods and services is going up in the world, well, the purchasing power of that gold goes up in tandem because it's relatively scarce and has these other monetary properties. So it starts to store a lot of value. As it stores more value, people eventually start using it as a medium of exchange. And then finally, when enough people use it as a medium of exchange, they start to denominate prices in it, which makes it a unit of account. So gold evolved, right? It evolved from this thing that was just a physical commodity into this social construct called money. And so gold then becomes, and over time, when the whole world eventually moves to a gold standard, again, read Safeteen's book for the details on all of this, and the multi-century process that this entails, gold then becomes the central flagpole, if you will, for this emergent social order of the free market, right? That we literally developed the distributed computing system that is the free market, centered on gold, right? Gold is the communications network, if you will, for this distributed computing enterprise that's occurring in the minds of men across space and across time. And so there you go, right? There is, you've symbolized in the monetization process of gold the transcendence that it represents. And so the Philosopher's Stone are going after that. It's the transcendence or the evolutionary process itself. It's the process, not the product, right? You're not trying to necessarily make gold. You're trying to create the process by which gold came to be this, again, came to be this social construct rather than just a physical commodity. And so gold is like the analog ideal that we then perfected, or at least evolved again through digital technology, right? We've taken the principles that gold was the best tool for representing these principles or implementing these principles, but now we found a better tool to put them in.
Have you ever wanted to live in an off-grid community with complete food, energy, and water independence? If so, then you need to check out the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a pioneering community designed to foster longevity and well-being, eliminating elements that detract from these goals. At the farm, the convergence of nature, nutritious food, a supportive community, and the ethos of slowing down is unparalleled. Positioned at the gateway to the UNESCO World Heritage-nominated Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the farm at Okefenokee stands as a testament to a lifestyle that truly nurtures health and happiness. Unlike conventional housing developments where a token communal garden may suffice, the farm itself is the community. Small, intimate microvillages seamlessly integrate into the fabric of a sprawling agricultural community. So if you're interested in joining this off-grid community, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about becoming a member. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on their custom cabin pricing. Again, go to okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare,
And even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. I'd like to thank my friends at Swan Bitcoin for their long-standing support of the What is Money show. Swan's mission is to help millions of people get into Bitcoin, so they built the best solution to set up recurring Bitcoin buys and automatic withdrawals into cold storage. With the Swan app, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start buying Bitcoin. If you're a new customer, you get $10 in free Bitcoin for signing up, and the first $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy incurs 0 fees. If you're an existing Swan customer, then the next $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy now incurs 0 fees. So if you love to recommend Bitcoin to friends and family, then Swan is the best place to start. So go to swanbitcoin.com/breedlove to get started today. Again, that's swanbitcoin.com/breedlove. There's another excerpt here I'll read. I think Iliad, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, captures this really well. And so Peterson writes, "The alchemist viewed himself as midwife to nature, bringing to fruition what nature endeavored slowly to produce, and therefore as aid to a transformation aimed at producing something ideal. Gold, quote-unquote gold, is that ideal." Right? Again, gold symbolizes the ideal. It's not necessarily the physical gold itself, but it's what it symbolized, which is this process of moving toward an ideal, basically. And then he quotes Iliade here, who wrote, "The nobility of gold is thus the fruit at its most mature. The other metals are common because they are crude. They are not ripe. In other words, nature's final goal is the completion of the mineral kingdom, its ultimate maturation. The natural transmutation of metals into gold is inscribed in their destiny. The tendency of nature is to perfection. But since gold is the bearer of a highly spiritual symbolism, gold is immortality, say the Indian texts repeatedly, it is obvious that a new idea is coming into being. The idea of the part assumed by the alchemist as the brotherly savior of nature. He assists nature to fulfill her final goal, to attain her ideal, which is the perfection of its progeny, be it mineral, animal, or human, to its supreme ripening, which is absolute immortality and liberty." And that is the bridge for me between gold and Bitcoin, right? It's not, the gold becomes symbolic of the process which gave rise to gold as money, essentially. And if the ideal, if you took those principles to their extreme and ultimate conclusion, which would be absolute immortality and liberty, as Peterson describes here, or Iliade describes here rather, is Bitcoin, right? It is this permanent implementation of sound monetary principles and this instrument that perfects political freedom of the individual. And so this is why, I think, in struggling to define Bitcoin, I think digital gold the word gold considered in its deepest sense, not just the chemical, physical metal, not just the commodity, not just the money even, but this, instrument representing the process of transcendence or divination or conversion from physical commodity to social construct, that digital gold is probably the most apt description for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add on to that is that when it was the description of this midwife, nature's midwife, like helping nature to achieve its end, clearly, empirically, that's not how the world works exactly. But the metaphor, if taking that to its natural conclusion, is that if the goal is to continually achieve towards this perfection, well, then gold isn't the end state. It's the transcendence of gold.
Right.
Bitcoin is the transcendence of gold.
Yeah.
And it's the transcendence of alchemical ideas of gold. So all of this. And there's the only other point I wanted to highlight before we sort of skip to the end a little bit, but really the point in doing that is to analyze the conclusions. But the only thing that I wanted to point out is that basically the intentions have to be right. That it's on the subject, the doer, to basically perfect oneself before being able to actually do the alchemy. Yeah. So there's a couple of short excerpts here that I could read quickly just to hit that point before we move on, if that works.
Yeah, I'll just throw one thing out there just because it's on your last point before you do that. Before anyone gets after us saying oh, so you think Bitcoin's the perfection of money and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, maybe not, actually. Maybe this process continues, right? Maybe we needed to evolve to gold and we needed to go through the pain of fiat, and then we evolved to Bitcoin. And then what comes after that? Who knows, right? That you could get super out there and think, oh, we develop, say Bitcoin keeps driving down the cost of energy production, that we eventually innovate something that gives us free energy or nearly free energy. In that world where energy is free or nearly free, wealth becomes so hyper abundant that money might not even be relevant at that point. We could become a post-money society. Right, there's a lot of people that have talked about this. Was it Charles Eisenstein and his sacred economics or whatever it's called? That we could, somehow switch to a post-money world, and I don't think that's anywhere near the realm of feasibility. But if it were to ever be feasible, it would be through driving the cost of energy production so extremely low that, again, energy is the primary input to every economic process, that wealth becomes so abundant that we've alleviated economic scarcity to such an extent that money might not be relevant, or would at least be way less relevant. It's hard to imagine a world where money is not useful at all, because we always have uncertainty. We always have some scarcity, right, of time, of physical space, etc. But we could make money, paradoxically, again, Bitcoin could make money so much less relevant that it could, in the same way gold sort of leads to alchemy, leads to science, leads to Bitcoin that undermines itself, that maybe Bitcoin could follow a similar process over multiple centuries that eventually could undermine itself. So just want to throw that out there as again, I want to keep people in the domain of process-oriented thinking rather than product, right? We're not saying, oh, Bitcoin's the final answer, Bitcoin's the utopia, because that would be very totalitarian, which is something we've obviously railed against in this series. So I want to make sure that we're not presenting ourselves that way. That maybe this is just another step. It's like a stepping stone towards whatever the next thing is. And, you could let your imagination run wild about what that actually could be.
It's Star Trek world, right? That's the typical representation of that, and the utopianism of Star Trek representations and similar is interesting as well, because it implies that money isn't needed and scarcity is solved. But that would take us back to a point of that the only way that would really be true is if no one is coerced into doing anything, right? Mm-hmm. If scarcity gets solved, no one would be forced to do anything they don't want to do. All interactions can become consensual, because if there isn't any kind of power or force that is meting out the goods necessary to survive and to flourish as humanity, right?
No.
Well, then enabling society to go into a place where no one has to do anything except consensually, well, then that's as utopian as it gets for me, in the sense that solve scarcity and enable freedom.
There's way less to fight about, at least, right? Again, not to speak in absolute terms, or like maybe we don't solve scarcity, but we minimize scarcity, and therefore we minimize what there is to fight about. Therefore, we minimize the fighting.
It's the attainment of eternal peace, something like that, which I know we've touched.
Or an asymptotic approach to it, right? Again, not. It's so dangerous with language where we say like, oh, we'll get there. It's always a journey. It's never a destination, right? We might not ever get to world peace, for instance, but we can definitely get a lot closer than we are today.
Well, and it's just like the creeping alleviation of poverty, basically.
Yeah.
The advancement of human flourishing, maybe equality in the world as defined by the Gini coefficients, like the richest in a society compared to the poorest in society, and the ratios of that. Okay, that's one way of looking at it, but another way of looking at it is that the floor is getting raised, right?
Yeah.
The percentage of people in extreme poverty that have virtually no chance of getting out of that's going down, 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 down. Human flourishing is only increasing, and by continuing to add in layers that take away all of the skewed incentives of the fiat world, well, then all it's going to do is increase raising that floor. Mm-hmm. And so there doesn't need to be a goal of lowering the ceiling. Just raise the floor.
Right.
Raise the floor of human flourishing. And so constantly reducing the impacts of scarcity and decreasing the friction on human free interactions.
Yeah.
Well, this sounds like exactly what is completely stemming from the original goals of alchemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if Bitcoin is doing that, well, then it's absolutely fulfilling those steps.
And we have, in addition to all of this, right, you have the economic theory of why it would work. You have the alchemical mythology of, the why, maybe not the why it would work, but the why it's a noble pursuit, at least. But we also have the empirical evidence of, well, capitalism works, right? Like in the places where we've let capitalism be unleashed, we've honored individual life, liberty, and property. We've seen economic flourishing. We've seen economic prosperity boom. And so all we're saying with a Bitcoin thing in a very practical way, right? If you're not interested in all of this mythological exploration, is like Bitcoin is just an enabler of unbridled capitalism. So it's going to take that capitalism, right, and in the perfection of private property, the perfection of price discovery, and the perfection of individual political freedom, it takes that to the next level. So if you want to just strip away all of this, philosophical talk and just look at it that way, I think that's a very secular yet sensical way to look at it too. It's like we're just talking about making capitalism even more unbridled, and that is what raises the floor, as you were saying.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to just segue us to the next point here is that this all comes back to that there's no way to do this. There's no way that any of this actually works without us as individuals already doing the self-work. And I think that's been a theme throughout this entire book, is that the answer to the question of what is the meaning of life and various other related deep questions is to take up the mantle and be the hero yourself, to be the savior yourself. There are layers to do that, and so if I can just quickly, the second excerpt I was going to read here is to perfect nature, it was necessary to harbor the correct attitude, to undertake the appropriate rituals and processes of spiritual purification, to become pure as the thing desired. The worker stood as example to nature, in small things and great. In the case of alchemy, which ambitiously desired to redeem the fallen material world, the alchemist himself had to become great. Thus, the alchemical literature might be regarded in part as one long meditation on the nature of the ideal man.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point on this entire thing is really just to say that Bitcoin might be the tool that enables all of these things to happen to the world, right? But the implication, as I'm reading it here, is that us as individuals still need to do the work to become worthy of the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
So it flips it back on us, basically.
Yeah, and it, again, is such a practical, realistic vantage point on how to transform the world. How else could the collective change if it did not originate in individual change? Right, this is where I get very frustrated. This is the socialist argument, right? It's like, oh, you need to sacrifice individual freedoms for the greater good. It's like, hold up. The greater good is made up of individuals. Like, how are you going to compromise the fundamental elementary particle of the good, which is the individual, to serve this ephemeral greater good? Right? That's like, well, let's build the house higher by sacrificing its foundation or something. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? You're sawing off the branch on which you rest, kind of thing. And so, of course, like, again, just apply your intuition. How else could the world change other than individual psyches changing? Right? There's never going to be a top-down, like a law. No one's going to pass a law that says you either act right or else, and that's going to create a revolution in consciousness. No, it's never been that way. It's always been bottom up, individual out, right? And so that's what Bitcoin is, right? And this is why, I mean, this is where it does get into the domain of like the religious, right? It's not being imposed on anyone. It's being voluntarily adopted. People that are voluntarily reforming themselves, and then in cleaning their room, as Peterson would say, then they can go on to reform the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the point of this alchemy segment for me, definitely. And so, I mean, I think without getting into the details too much further and too much deeper of the alchemy stuff itself, the takeaway is definitely, to me, that it's a continuation of all the other ideas from the book, and it's a call to become the best you, and to find the ideal thing. And the alchemy section is implying exactly what that ideal thing is. And even if Dr. Peterson was not aware that thing was Bitcoin, well, it's Bitcoin. And so,
Yeah.
I'm not going to go ahead and say that everyone has to drop everything in life and dedicate themselves solely to Bitcoin. But I think if you figure it out, that becomes the inevitable conclusion. And that's certainly what's happened for me.
It seems to be an irreversible path, right? It's, again, not being pushed on anyone. There's no coercion. It's totally voluntary, right? Study it at your leisure. But there seems to be this very serious correlation, at least, if not causation, like number of hours spent studying Bitcoin. You've seen these charts on Twitter, right? It's like number of hours spent studying Bitcoin on maybe the x-axis, I guess. And then on the y-axis is like likelihood of holding all assets in Bitcoin, something like that. And it's just, up and to the right, because as you study what this thing represents technologically, ethically, even mythologically, as we're exploring here, it just becomes the thing you're going to be all in on. Now, again, figure it out for yourself. I'm not here to tell you that's your conclusion, but there are a lot of people that walk that path, and people go in, but people don't come back out. So then you play it out, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. The best and brightest minds in the world are going into this black hole. No one's coming out once they pass the event horizon, which is somewhere around 100 hours of studying it, apparently. No one comes out. How could this thing not win? The best and brightest go in, the best and brightest don't come out. And they're armed with like the best form of money that's ever been invented. How could they not win?
Yeah, it's like a feedback loop. If the best and brightest then get the advantage of adopting the best money in the world, then what's going to happen,
And to take it a step further, the best and brightest then somehow start undergoing these processes of individual transformation, right? That they start looking at their weak points, whatever they may be, right? They're not exercising, they're not eating right, they're drinking, they're not starting a family, they're, maybe aimless without some type of wisdom tradition or ritual practice in their life, and they start addressing their own weak points. So the best and brightest go in and they get better and brighter. How does that group of that represent unbridled capitalism, how do they get outcompeted by anyone else? It's like almost by definition they win. It's like, well, we're the best, brightest, and now richest people, increasingly the richest. Where are they at? Where are they going? And so that's like the Bitcoin black hole, and that makes me wildly optimistic. As dark and chaotic as things seem to be drifting in the world, it's like, at least thank God we have Bitcoin. Thank God we have this phenomenon that we're reorganizing ourselves around a new central flagpole, right? There's a new emergent social order. Like we saw one emerge into gold, we're seeing a new one emerge into Bitcoin. And that's salvific, right? Is that the word? Like, it's just there's salvation there, that we can rebuild something from the world that's burning.
Couldn't agree more. And I echo the optimism, absolutely. And I love that this book is saying this to us in completely different ways. This book from 1999. I mean, there's sovereign individual echoes here, right? That it's a similar kind of book, that it's echoing and telling things. Maybe it's not the same type of book, but it's predating Bitcoin, but it's predicting Bitcoin and predicting the effects and being a roadmap and a goal. Yes. So yeah, I love it. So I think to me this was the summation of at least the starting point of the Alchemy section.
This is crazy too. So the title, The Sovereign Individual, comes from Nietzsche's work, actually. I think, and I could correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think Carl Jung was a student of Nietzsche, or he was at least, I don't know, someone have to check me on that. Obviously, Peterson's a huge advocate and student of Carl Jung. And so again, we're seeing this what precedes Nietzsche. Nietzsche is obviously studying philosophy and all of these things. So we see these different branches, that spun out into maps of meaning, spun out into the sovereign individual, yet they all are kind of rooted in this same thing. And that was, Nietzsche's idea of the sovereign individual is the answer to the world, right? To the death of God.
Well, and the funny thing too, as well, is that I think Freud was the more direct influence on Jung, right? But all of this is
then was Nietzsche pre-Freud then?
Well, I think they were actually at the same time, but Freud, Nietzsche, Jung, right? Well, Freud is Austrian. There's something going on, man. There's something going on in that flourishing society that's just spawned all of this stuff, right? Austrian economics coming in at the same time as the discovery of the mind, psychoanalysis. There's just something there that this amazing generation of intellect,
yes,
influential intellect was from basically Austria, Switzerland, Germany in the second half of the 1800s.
Gold standard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just pulled this up. It says the psychologist Alfred Adler and Carl Jung were deeply influenced, as was Sigmund Freud, by Nietzsche, who said of Nietzsche that he had a more penetrating understanding of himself than any other man who ever lived or was ever likely to live. So again, I mean, and Nietzsche coined the term the sovereign individual. And so I say that just that these ideas have like common root, right? And that's what we're doing, is we're tracing back the genealogy, or the genealogy of these ideas, basically. And alchemy is one of those 4 offshoots, right? It was like Christ gave rise to the church, but also gave rise to alchemy. And then so we've had this now we have this schism, right, between religion and science, we think, but they have a common origin. And Bitcoin, and a lot of people were aimed at this. How do you reunite religion and science? And, I've tweeted stuff about this before, but like, obviously Bitcoin has this religious element, as we've explored a lot, right? It's a belief system. It's, faith in an ideal. You have to enact it via ritual and whatnot, but it also has a lot of scientific underpinning, right? It's computer science, it's economic science, etc. And so maybe Bitcoin is the Philosopher's Stone in that perspective, right? It reunites science and religion. So anyways, if we haven't lost the audience yet with all of this crazy talk, there's a lot more to be had towards the end of the chapter.
Yeah, I think let's go there.
So I will read an excerpt here. I guess the first thing I'll do, because we're skipping a lot of the chapter that goes into more of the esoteric terminology, symbolic terminology, because to really get into that, you have to go through definitions a lot, and I just don't think it's going to be a good use of our time to do that here. However, at the end of the chapter, he does more of a summation, and it's in clearer language, so I think that's where you see a lot of the parallels to Bitcoin. And so what I would like to throw out, though, are 3 important definitions that apply even to this end section. And so one is the kingdom of God. Now, obviously, we say this, that sounds very religious, sounds supernatural, otherworldly, heaven. But Peterson defines it in his text as a simultaneously integrated intrapsychic and social state. So this is the ordered mind and the ordered social world, basically. That if you can have this kind of peace of mind and peace in the world, this is the kingdom of heaven, basically. Again, this is fractal, right? As above, so below. So as we were saying earlier, how could the greater good or world peace ever emerge without individual change, right? The below has to reflect the above and vice versa. So that's one. The kingdom of God is this like ideal state of the world, right? Where people are in peace of mind and there's peace in the world. The second one is spirit. And this is not a definition Peterson uses per se, but I think it's useful. I think this is Heidegger again, right? Spirit defined as the I that is in we and the we that is in I. And I think if you interpret spirit in kind of this more technical sense versus, again, typically we say the word spirit, people think ghost or something supernatural or otherworldly. But this is more of like the feedback between the individual and the whole, or the individual and the collective, right? That what exists between them. And so this points towards the deeper reality for me that everything is an unbroken wholeness and everything affects everything else, right? So everything we do, we are intimately and inexorably connected to the whole. So everything we do, everything we think, every act we take, there are reverberations of that into the whole. And so what's another way of saying karma is real, right? Like every action has consequences, every thought, every action, everything. And so the other thing spirit points to me is that human interaction is very imitative. So again, everything we do, right, like what actions we take, well, we are influencing, we're imprinting that value system on the world, on those around us, right? More significantly on children, right? Children are going to be more imitative than adults, but we are influencing people with every thought, every action. So this puts a great deal of responsibility on the individual to really get their intrapsychic order, to get their patterns of action in line before they go out and try to change the world, right? Just like Peterson says, clean your room before you criticize the world. And the other thing that this definition of spirit points to for me is that all action and phenomena are basically, in the most fundamental sense, they are acts of exchange, right? We're trading with one another, we're trading with our future self, and that any course of action we choose, we're choosing at the exclusion of all other possible actions. So we're making trades with each other and our future self all the time, which Peterson earlier combined these into one category called the abstract other, right? We can never know what other people are thinking, just like we can never know what our future self is going to be thinking. And so all of our actions in the individual present moment are in relation to these abstract others, which are present others and our future self, basically. And so, again, just to say that's a definition that I think is useful for interpreting these last few pages. Peterson has, in other parts of the book, he seems to use the definition that spirit is like the masculine force as opposed to the feminine. And so I just want to be clear that I'm actually at odds with his definition in this one respect. So I just wanted to be clear about that for people. And then the last definition I think is useful for interpreting these last few pages is spiritual work. And this is something that he defines as work that is simultaneously on oneself and on the external circumstances of existence, which is, again, as we've described in Alchemy, right? This is the whole point, is to perfect the world, you need to perfect the individual, right? Hence the pursuit of the alchemists to purify both of themselves and purify things in nature, right? Up to the creation of gold from base metals. So with all of that definitional groundwork, I'm going to read an excerpt on my page 454, which I'm not sure what page that is for you.
Maybe got a 10-page difference these days, but
yeah. So Peterson writes, the union of the united spirit and body with the world means recognition of the essential equivalence of all experience, or consideration of all aspects of experience as literally equivalent to the self. We presume the existence of a final barrier between subject and object, but a standpoint exists that gives to all aspects of individual experience, whether subjective or objective, equal status as aspects of experience. Redeeming any aspect of that experience, then, whether material or psychological, whether self or other, is then regarded as the same act, as the act whose purpose is establishment of the kingdom of God, which is simultaneously psychological and social state. Spiritual work may therefore be regarded as indistinguishable from work on the external circumstances of existence. Redeem yourself, redeem the world. Or alternatively, the attempt to bring about the perfection of the external world may be regarded as equivalent to the attempt to perfect oneself. After all, dedication to an ideal necessitates development of self-discipline. This is voluntary apprenticeship. The world and the self are not different places. From this perspective, all is experience. The attempt to redeem either necessarily brings about redemption in the other. So, yeah, again, we've hit on this earlier, but action, right? Action being the category or the most fundamental description of reality, and it's the category that's superordinate to subject-object duality, the categories of subject-object. And so I think that, that's what he's framing up here, right? It's this giving subjective and objective equal status as aspects of experience. Like, well, what are we talking about? We're talking about human action, right? That's the only place where subject and object are one, is in the act, right? The act through which mind and matter come into contact. I talked to John Vervaeke about this in New York City, and I was asking him about this specifically, right, as the idea that action could be superordinate to subject-object duality. And he was saying how he really appreciated how Hoppe used the word contact, because what a lot of philosophers are saying today, post-Descartes, is that we have lost a contact epistemology, that we've fallen into the illusion that we can decompose reality into these propositions and then to sort of analytically move them around to describe the world, but that obviates the reality that there is this intimate contact that occurs through action, basically, that is always beyond propositional description, right? That, again, actions speak louder than words. There's a reason this is such a fundamental adage in our existence, right? Because you can't fully contain or describe actions or phenomena in general in words, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words is another one, right? We know this, right? It's rooted in our intuition for a reason. And so I think alchemy is in this passage here, he's pointing at that basically, right? That there is something right beyond subject-object, nowhere unknown, that we need to take seriously. And what was the alchemist doing? They were trying to take it seriously, right? They were trying to take, through my own actions, how do I improve myself? And how do I improve the world through my actions? And this, again, becomes the dream from which science is born. And here we are, right? We've come a long way towards improving the external world, but it seems like we may have lost that other side of the aim of alchemy, which was to improve ourselves, right, ethically. And hopefully Bitcoin is, again, kind of reuniting these two things by incentivizing the individual to develop themselves.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is just building on everything we've been talking about in this series. But the call to act intentionally, like to really have intention, to understand what you're doing in life, that's important. And I mean, there's so many ways that you can just dull yourself and just be reactive to the world around you and not act with any kind of intentionality. But it really shows that that's the way to not be able to accomplish anything, right? If you are the object, then nothing is going to happen. You're not going to be able to do anything to affect the world. And so, again, it's just this call to action. Improve yourself and act intentionally. Act with some forethought. And so, yeah, this point just continues to echo that it really is up to the individual to make the changes needed, and not leave it up to just that Bitcoin is going to fix this. That's not inevitable. The action of the actor, the alchemist, the subject, whatever you want to call it, that's essential.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if Bitcoin is just a tool, ultimately, and if the individual is not making use of that tool properly, then it's not going to do anything for you, right? The hammer is not going to build the house. The knife's not going to prepare your dinner, right? The car is not going to drive itself. Well, maybe it will now. It's a bad analogy, given recent technology. But yeah, Bitcoin is going to incentivize you to act maybe more properly, right? And making theft more difficult, let's say, or coercion less profitable. But it's not going to take those actions on your behalf.
No, and so I think the points that we're kind of getting to here, and that this is hopefully starting to underscore a bit better, is that the alchemical journey is almost it was the systematic way of becoming the hero, becoming the savior, and doing it in such a way that it might have an effect on ultimate reality. And yeah, well, again, it's just that it's the call to us to be the modern day alchemists, to do the work, put in the intention, and get to work at achieving that ideal.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221.
I'm going to read another excerpt here. This is on my page 455. Peterson writes, "The alchemical procedure was based on the attempt to redeem matter, to transform it into an ideal. This procedure operated on the assumption that matter was originally corrupted, like man in the story of Genesis. The study of the transformations of corruption and limitation activated a mythological sequence in the mind of the alchemist. This sequence followed the pattern of the way, upon which all religions have developed. Formal Christianity adopted the position that the sacrifice of Christ brought history to a close, and that belief in that sacrifice guaranteed redemption. Alchemy rejected that position in its pursuit of what remained unknown. In that heroic pursuit, the alchemist found himself transformed." And then he quotes, maybe this is Iliad again, I'm not sure. He doesn't cite the author, but this is from not Peterson, an author he's citing. "Whereas the Christian belief is that man is freed from sin by the redemptory act of Christ, the alchemist was evidently of the opinion that the restitution to the likeness of original and incorrupt nature had still to be accomplished by the art, and this can only mean that Christ's work of redemption was regarded as incomplete. In view of the wickedness which the quote-unquote prince of this world, undeterred, goes on perpetrating as liberally as before, one cannot withhold all sympathy from such an opinion." And so this idea that the church viewed Christ as humanity's final redemption. It was like, we're done here. Everyone just needs to go to church and believe, again, he puts belief in quotation marks here, in my mind, highlighting the insufficiency of propositional belief, right? There had to be an enactment, right? You can't just go to church and profess verbally that I believe in Christ. There had to be a way to encourage people to embody the principles that Christ spoke. And that's what the alchemists were saying. Is like, and then so they look around, the alchemists are looking around the world saying, all right, church, you said this is the final redemption, but we still have poverty, we still have corruption, we still have disease, we still have all of these horrible things. Maybe that was not the whole answer, right? Maybe we need to go into the laboratory of nature and figure something else out. And that's, again, the dream from which science was born, right? You get a fork from formal Christianity that becomes alchemy, that becomes science. And then you get ultimately to Bitcoin, right? And I think, the opening line to this was the alchemical procedure was based on the attempt to redeem matter and transform it into an ideal. And he talks about, the principles of Christ, how it parallels the passion of Christ, basically, which is a quote we'll get to in a minute. But so they're trying to alchemy forks off of the church, but it's doing so in an attempt to rediscover or recreate the principles of Christ in some tool or in a substance, in a tangible technological thing, right? And so I think Bitcoin could be viewed this way, as it's sort of like matter melted into the ideals of Christendom, right? And so what did Christ say? He said a few things. Tell the truth, right? Bitcoin's obviously a truth machine. It's honest money. Christ said to love thy neighbor as thyself, which is really honoring individual self-sovereignty, right? Life, liberty, and property. Everyone plays by the same rules, basically. He said to put God above all else. This one's really tricky, but I think in the language that Peterson has given us, you could call this, God as one of two things. Either reverence for the unseen principles in the kingdom of God, right? Which again, we described the kingdom of God as the simultaneous intrapsychic and social, integrated intrapsychic and social order. So what are the principles that allow people to bring harmony to mind and harmony to the world? Or, which is the same thing said another way, I think, you could look at God as the amalgam of the known, the unknown, and the process that mediates between the two, right? The known being like the past or goods produced in an economic sense, the unknown being the future or the businesses that produce goods, right? Their plans for producing goods in the future. And then the process that mediates between the two is human action and money, right? Money is like the technological implementation or the language of human action, as we often say. And so, yeah, putting God above all else, right? It's like holding this idea that it's not, again, process, not products, right? It's neither the known nor the unknown nor well, I guess it is kind of the process that mediates between them too, but it's the all three that really give you the accurate description of how reality works, including yourself, right? And so I think it's pretty incredible that Bitcoin seems to reflect these highest teachings of Christ in an incentive system. It's an incentive system that is encouraging people to adopt, the great commandments or the great lessons that Christ left with us. And considering that the alchemical pursuit was to find a tool that encouraged the individual to move beyond propositional belief in Christ and toward an enactment of Christ's teachings, that to me is deeply philosophically mind-blowing. And how else could, then again, as we talked about earlier, the religious fervor surrounding Bitcoin is a feature, not a bug. It is like by design We need this to drive an actual peaceful social revolution, right? Or the evolution of our intrapsychic state and the social state. We need this tool. It's indispensable to the process.
You know, the thing that came to mind exactly when you were saying this as the subsumation of all the three states, the known, the unknown, the mediator. This brought me back to slightly earlier in the chapter where there's a diagram of the prima materia, or the round chaos, the alchemical ouroboros, all of these things. So this is just, sorry to add a new definition here, kind of, but it's the base material essentially. But this base material is supposed to be that which everything is kind of contained within. All of the human experience is there, and then outside of that, you can get this ascent and reintegration into the state of gold. And that's the idea, right? And so if Bitcoin is the process and it also achieves the end, well, then Bitcoin is sort of this ultimate attainment of it's all the properties at once, then, alchemically. So it's like the solution to the alchemical problem, based on what you just said there. And the other thing that came to mind about just that the process of Christianity not being complete, I think that's really important, and that is the part that differentiates from modern evangelical Christianity, which is what I grew up in. And the distinction there that I'll assert is that it needed to not be that the process stopped when Christ redeemed everyone and that's just it, just leaning on the belief that there is always a process, there is always chaos being injected into the world that needs to be mediated. There is always an ideal that needs to be strived towards in this human realm, which is all we have. And by thinking in terms of things like the kingdom of God in the metaphorical sense, that everything is in its ideal state, essentially. Well, maybe that's not technically achievable, but as we've been saying, this asymptote, right? Getting towards the kingdom of God. That's a good goal, metaphorically. And so it can't just be that we're done. It can't just be that the process of human achievement and the process of the individual transcendence, it's not just done by believing. It's done by taking up the example and living like that. And so I think that's a really good parallel, and certainly is something that I've got friends who are strong Christian believers, and I would like to know what they think about that. It's an interesting one.
No, it's a fantastic point, and resonates with, again, a lot of the things we've talked about throughout this entire series, right? The emphasis on dynamism rather than stasis. A process that completes is no longer a process, right? By definition, if the process is complete, then it's no longer a process. And maybe the word state here is misleading, right? Where he's even saying like the ideal state, or, even the kingdom of God. We think of, kingdom's maybe a little more dynamic because you think of it as like a city that's in motion, perhaps, but a state of being, right? That's somewhat misleading because state is closely related to the word static, right? As in not changing. And you're not actually going for a state of being. It's this mode of becoming, rather. Right? So reality, again, as we've said, reality is constant, dynamic process. That never changes. Doesn't matter how you classify it. It's our classifications that often become static. And that's the dangerous domain of dogmatism, totalitarianism, I think you just said evangelical Christianity, right? That they viewed Christianity as done, right? Like the product was complete. There was no more process. And in that comes a dogmatic position that becomes very untenable for a lot of people, right? Because it's not adapting, it's not growing, it's not assimilating new perspectives, new information, new technological change, etc. And that will always fail, because guess what? Reality is not static. Show me anything static in reality. Nothing. The paradox is the only thing that never changes is change itself, right? The only thing static in reality is the dynamic, basically, because everything's dynamic. And so Christianity will never be complete. And anyone that ever tells you anything is complete or any plan or any whatever, it's like, no, that's totalitarian. You're mistaking the product for the process. And while it's useful fiction, like we need to view a world as objects and fixed things so we can contend with it in our limited cognitive capabilities, it's fundamentally not true. So we have to understand that we're always, these constructs we're using, these static constructs we use to describe reality are provisional, right? They're always subject to change, and they are just a map of the territory. They are never the underlying.
You know, the funny thing here is that I wonder if there's sort of a brand of Christianity that actually takes in these ideas that will come out and be sort of a modern religion, but that doesn't have the dogma, that is about the process and is about understanding these things from the individual perspective. I wonder if we're ever going to see something like that, or if it's just going to be something kind of held on the side with either people who choose to believe in Christianity and be Christian, and others who don't do that but still live by principles like this, and therefore are basically actually still culturally Christian, as you said, Dawkins told you, and yeah. So it's interesting that to me this book is about this philosophy, this map, this way of viewing the world, that is as good as any way of viewing the world that can help the individual achieve and live in the world the best way possible.
Yeah.
And it's pulling together all of these ideas that we were talking about before, that there's these roots in Nietzsche and then paralleling that with Austrian economics and all of this, that by tapping into this knowledge base, that it's just simply a way to self-improve and self it's the owner's manual, as we've said. And so I wonder if these ideas will proliferate and become a part of some new way of integrating into modern religion.
Right. No, well said. And I don't know enough about this, but in my conversations with Vervaeke, I think to answer your question, right, you wonder if a version of Christianity will emerge that is more holistically encompassing of these ideas, right, rather than dogmatic, more process-oriented than product-oriented. I think he would say that Christian Neoplatonism is that, right, and a lot of this is contained in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So Jonathan Pajot, who he speaks with often, who's also has his own channel, has been a bit of an acolyte of Peterson. When you hear him talk, he talks in a lot of this language, actually. He's talking about fractals. He's talking about there's nothing you can say about God that will ever be true, right? So like God is beyond language, beyond knowledge, beyond categorization in a way. And so I don't know enough about that, but I think if those that are curious, that's where I would say to start your investigation, is Christian Neoplatonism or Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And again, it was the Neoplatonic concept, is just a philosophy, a philosophical concept of the good, right? Plato's the good. That's what was inherited into Christianity as the concept of God. So this religion is not guy in the sky deity. It has a philosophical foundation. And to try and describe what that is, the analogy that I love is the eye does not see light, but it sees by way of light. In the same way, the mind cannot conceive of the good, but it conceives by way of the good. All right, so it's not something that can be captured in knowledge, but it's that process, again, by which knower and known come into existence. I would say the good is human action in a way. And is that to say human action is God? Not necessarily. Maybe it's action more broadly construed, which would be a pretty good description of God, right? Like all metaphysical action or all physical action or something like that. But the Neoplatonic good is neither the known nor the unknown. It's the process by which that mediates between the known and the unknown, right? Process that gives rise to subject and object. What is that process? Well, for us humans, at least, it's human action. Maybe that goes beyond humans. Maybe that's something that's more integral to the universe. I don't know. But again, there's a investigation to be had there. So I think it's a great question, and I'm very fascinated with that question too, and that's where I'm currently at with it.
Well, and I mean, so first of all, great points, and big fan of Jonathan Pageau as well, and the Eastern Orthodox and Neoplatonism stuff. I'll definitely look into more, and I mean, this is also one of those things, right? Is that the constant search for new information and new ways to look at things. I mean, that's so important, right? And I mean, in the Bitcoin space, you have this rabbit hole, this seemingly endless rabbit hole, but eventually you kind of stop off at places that interest you. And so, I think those of us that get into this philosophical mindset, which actually, I think the goal of the sort of the philosophical angle on Bitcoin is actually a little bit about this understanding how through Bitcoin as an enabler, you can change yourself to be better equipped to act in the world and to be better equipped to change the world through your action if you want. And I mean, there's so many angles to it. There's of course economic stuff. There's technical stuff. Technical aspects of Bitcoin. It's all important. But I think that the angle that is actually accessible to everyone, depending on how you're willing to go, how deep you're willing to go, is this aspect of self-improvement and taking on the mantle of the hero, of the savior. I mean, this is something that everyone can do. And then it just becomes about finding what is the goal at the end. What's the highest good? Mm-hmm. And so it all ties back in there. And so digging further into this stuff, and I mean, the pros and cons of organized religion, just to kind of the biggest pro is the organization of it, helping people to kind of get into the system and to get some benefit out of that, right? I don't know if we'll see that in the future, but I certainly hope that these ideas and the freedom and flexibility that Bitcoin allows for those who adopt it to be able to take on more challenges and to be able to do more impactful things with their actions. I think that's an ultimate good that I don't think we'll ever see the true impact of in our lifetimes. But hopefully we get to enjoy the ride a little bit and see the fruits of this modern day alchemy play out a little bit more.
Yeah, and I would say the major bad of organized religion is dogma, right? This idea that the history is unalterable, uneditable, my God is better than your God type of thing. That's the root of religious wars. And so maybe that's just rooted in bad philosophy, right? That people get so anchored on the products rather than the process, right? Because if you look at the process between Christianity and Islam, for instance, like there's it's a lot of emphasis on the individual and freedom and telling the truth. Like the processes are the same, right? If you follow either one of those codes, not exactly the same, but broadly, they're the same. But then if you want to get into like the actual products, then okay, well, the word is obviously it's a different book, different sequence, different characters, etc. Not entirely true, by the way. Christ is in the Quran. He's not considered to be the final prophet. He's considered to be a prophet in a long series of prophets. Obviously, Muhammad would be the latest prophet. But maybe all of that dogmatism could be undermined if we had a better philosophy of language, right? As language is provisional, not final. So again, you might write these things in the book. Maybe the book itself is uneditable, but there's something beneath that book that it represents, right? The spirit of the text or the underlying mythological blueprint, so I don't know what term we'd use here, but if people would appreciate that, then maybe they'd be less likely to go to war and say, oh, no, you need to read my book, not your book. It's like, well, wait a minute. We could read different books as long as we're sort of according on these fundamental axioms of action, right? Or not, I guess these aren't axioms, these are codes of action, right? Life, liberty, property, individual freedom, etc. So,
well, it's funny, like, books are a state. Books are a snapshot.
Right. It's a state machine, just like a computer. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the book is just, it's true at one point in time, and then it stops being true.
Yeah.
And so it's learning the process of being able to update that and being open to update that. And
that's what the Bible is, right? Bible means library. It's like a living text. These are many stories and books that have been accumulated over time, and they've been compiled into one book we call the Bible. But is that process over? I mean, how do we know? Like, history's not over. So,
it's been fixed for a while, and maybe that is the problem.
Yeah, maybe. But Peterson talks about books like Paradise Lost, where they started to really articulate the mythological figure of Satan, which was not very well articulated in the Bible as we construe it today. Now that those books are becoming quite old, they start to sort of become part of the biblical corpus. And who's to say at some point we might not re-architect the Bible again and say, all right, here's the new version, and it includes maybe passages from Paradise Lost. Who knows? Anyways, I think what you said earlier, though, about, again, very easy to get lost in abstract philosophy town up here in La La Land, but it all comes back down to the individual and how they act. And that's a really good segue, I think, to this next passage. Peterson writes, this quote-unquote realization of Christ on a plane transcending imitation, unquote, is an overwhelming idea. It makes of religious belief something far more than belief, something far more terrifying and far more promising. The sequence of the alchemical transformation paralleled Christ's passion, paralleled the myth of the hero and his redemption. The essential message of alchemy is that individual rejection of tyranny, voluntary pursuit of the unknown and terrifying, predicated upon faith in the ideal, may engender an individual transformation so overwhelming that its equivalent can only be found in the most profound religious myths. And so again, right, we see Bitcoin inspiring radical personal transformations in the lives of those who adhere to its principles most closely. Proof of work, radical truth, radical transparency, individual self-sovereignty, freedom, justice, etc. Right? Bitcoin is creating these transformations. And so individual rejection of tyranny, like the essential message of alchemy, individual rejection of tyranny, voluntary pursuit of the unknown. Like these sound exactly like the description Mises makes of the entrepreneur, right? It's like the free individual that's pursuing solutions to problems, right? We're trying to create new solutions to problems, but you optimize the entrepreneur by leaving him maximally free, right? Giving him, basically protecting life, liberty, and property, and then let people do everything else. And so that level of individual transformation, it's both mythological in one perspective, but also just sort of strictly economic in another, we're really just talking about that. Bitcoin's the enabling technology of that. Just enable the individual to, and obviously this is not the only tool, right? Bitcoin's not going to defend your life. It's not a force field. It's not a firearm, right? You can't protect your house with Bitcoin. But the fact that we're talking about this global incentive system that makes purchasing power really hard to steal tilts people toward a more universalized respect for life, liberty, and property. You'll still need the other tools, right? You'll still need rule of law. You'll still need firearms. You'll still need, whatever, those things to protect yourself and be on equal footing with other people. But it definitely, I think it is this ideal that he's describing, right? We have faith in an ideal, the ideal of, fixed money supply, 21 million, and fixed rules for people, right? Life, liberty, and property. That is how we create individual transformation, the individual rejection of tyranny, and the individual pursuit of the unknown. And that's the whole, that's it, right? That's what this whole book's been about.
And is it just kind of mind-blowing that this is what the book has been about? Like, and therefore that's what human civilization has been about.
Yeah. Right.
And it all points to that everything in the Bitcoin movement these days is completely aligned with the deepest mythologies, philosophies, the highest order of transcendence. Mm-hmm. It's aligned completely. And so this is where I'm personally grateful that I found this stuff and that I was able to get to Bitcoin through it. But I would love to see this stuff be more widespread, and I'd love for Dr. Peterson himself to really, really see that Bitcoin is doing exactly what he captured as the culmination of human civilization. Because I've heard him talk about this book, and I might be misrecollecting and therefore misrepresenting a little bit, but as far as I understand it, and his idea was to take all of these sources about human mythology, human civilization, and really compile and then distill down the key messaging.
Yeah,
I think he was effective. And if the key messaging is saying, go down to the sovereignty of the individual and enable freedom as much as possible, and work towards these ideals, which Bitcoin embodies most highest, at most high at this stage of humanity, well then, okay, we've got the answers. And that doesn't mean that the process is done, but it does mean that it becomes a lot more clear of what to do, and also gives some idea of how to do it. And so yeah, it's just mind blowing that this is the point.
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, and he will get it at the price he deserves, right? It's just if he lives long enough to see it, yeah, he will get it. I think it's almost inevitable. All right, this next thing, this one's just an absolute trip. I'm going to read the excerpt here. I'm on page 4 450, not 456, sorry. Peterson writes, in Christianity, spirit descends to matter, and the result of the union is the birth of Christ and, unfortunately, the formal realization of his opponent. In Alchemy, which compensated for the one-sided view of Christianity, matter rises to spirit, with analogous results. Creation of the lapis, or philosophical stone, which bears an unmistakable resemblance to Christ, embodied in abstractly material form. This form, the philosopher's stone, the lapis, was composed of the most paradoxical elements. It was base, cheap, immature, and volatile, perfect, precious, ancient, and solid, visible to all, yet mysterious, costly, dark, hidden, and evident, having one name and many names. So when I look at this as a description of Bitcoin, I mean, Satoshi told us, right, to imagine a base metal like gold that was uninteresting except for its ability to teleport. And so he's saying this, and then early on, obviously, so that's the base aspect, right? It's base. Also early on, Bitcoin's very immature. It was given away by faucets for a long time, right? People literally gave away Bitcoin. So AKA it was cheap, right? It had no price for a while, then eventually had a very low price. It was cheap. Also, of course, highly volatile, right? This is the one thing that most people know about Bitcoin. Extremely volatile in price. But its money supply has always been perfect, right? It's a permanently fixed and solid casting of ancient monetary principles in a digital form. So it had this, again, this paradoxical thing, right? Also, Bitcoin is visible to all, yet understood by few. It is costly as well. So not only was it cheap, but it's also costly, which is what makes it work, is that you have to expend energy via the mining process to produce Bitcoin. That's what gives it its soundness as money. So the cost of Bitcoin mining that underpins its production is its costliness. It was also the backbone of the dark web, right? That people, it was dark and hidden, even though it was visible to all. It was the backbone to the dark web. It, was what gave rise to things like Silk Road. It's both hidden and evident simultaneously because it's pseudonymous, right? There's a public blockchain, but you don't necessarily know who controls what address. So it's both hidden and evident at the same time. It has one name, Bitcoin, but of course it has many names, right? People call it digital gold, internet of money, cryptocurrency, etc. So I mean, when I read this, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, how could this be written? Because first of all, name anything else that fits that description. There's nothing else. Like, I've scraped my brain. What else fits that description? I can think of nothing. Like, I'm open to suggestions, but, and again, this book's written in 1999, I think you said. How is that possible? How is that possible to so perfectly describe Bitcoin 10 years, I guess, before its release?
Well, and beyond that, I mean, the source for this alchemical lapis, I think those ideas are older than that,
Of course. Yeah. Of course. But yeah, again, this is like, the ideas, you're right, very ancient, but it's another one of those things, right, where different people in different parts of the world at the same time sort of stumble upon the same ideas. It's like Peterson was getting to this mythological realization about alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, and then shortly thereafter, Satoshi just made this thing a reality. And, maybe, who knows, whatever. Maybe I'm only reading this book because of Bitcoin, right? You're only into Bitcoin because of this book. So who knows which direction it goes, but I'm just floored by the accuracy of this description, how paradoxical it is. You would read this in a world absent Bitcoin, and you'd be like, that makes no sense. Nothing could be all of those things at once. Literally all opposites, right? It was base, let me read it again. Composed of the most paradoxical elements, it was base, cheap, immature, and volatile, but also perfect, precious, ancient, solid, visible to all, yet mysterious, costly, dark, hidden, and evident, having one name and many names. What else could possibly fit that description?
And somehow we live in the era when this is becoming evident. Because, I mean, this is one of the fun ideas that Bitcoin was a discovery and not an invention, right?
Yes.
I mean, this sort of goes along with that. It completely implies that Bitcoin has always been here in the ideas as this lapis. It's just that we needed the technology that was actually able to implement it correctly.
Yes.
And here we are.
Absolutely. And it's an idea that's come in many forms, right? I'd say the Philosopher's Stone is probably the oldest form, but there's the other ones, right? Like inviolable private property. I've had that idea for a long time. Couldn't make it a reality. Energy money was talked about not so long ago, right? 100 years ago by Ford and Edison and these guys. Now we have that. So it's amazing how the human imagination precedes human innovation and how far it precedes it. That is really staggering to me. It's like we are actually, they say science fiction precedes science fact. Like that notion runs deeper than we think.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And the ideas of this alchemy being echoed in Bitcoin, total trip. Yeah. And it's like we came through this entire book just to get this next level at the end, and this next level connection to Bitcoin. I love it.
Yeah, and I've got one more thing that I'll read here. One more thing I'll say about that is he said that I'm sorry, where did he say this? The idea this is the earlier passage, but the realization of Christ on a plane transcending imitation is an overwhelming idea. Again, we needed to get people beyond propositional belief of Christ and into an enacted imitation of Christ. But the way I read this when he says on a plane transcending imitation, I think that's incentives, right? Because Bitcoin's you're not imitating Bitcoin. I mean, I guess you sort of are if you adhere to its principles, but it's incentivizing you to behave like Christ. So it's given us something. Christ already gives us the role model for imitation in the stories, in the parables, in the scriptures. But now we have an incentive system pushing people that direction. So I'm going to read one last excerpt here. Peterson writes, this final value, the goal of the pursuit of the alchemist, is discovery and embodiment of the meaning of life itself. Integrated subjective being actively expressing its nature through manipulation of the possibilities inherent in the material/unknown world. This final goal is the production of an integrated intrapsychic condition identical to that of the mythological hero, acted out in a world regarded as equivalent to the self. Production of this condition, the lapis philosophorum, constitutes the antidote for the corruption of the world, attendant upon the fall, which is attendant upon the emergence of partial self-consciousness. The lapis is the agent of transformation, equivalent to the mythological redemptive hero, able to turn base metals into gold. It is, as such, something more valuable than gold, just as the hero is more valuable than any of his concrete productions. It is the process, not the product. And this is another area where Bitcoin is sort of transcendent. Like, what is Bitcoin? Is it process or is it product? It's kind of both in a way. It's like we have this fixed money supply, this static thing, but it's emerging from process, right? It's constant process that keeps that thing, that cornerstone fixed. And so for me, this whole thing, like subjective being, as he writes, subjective being expressing its nature through the possibilities inherent in the material world. That's a near perfect description of the market process itself, right? The people have subjective demand, and that demand becomes imprinted on the world as supply, right? We create things to satisfy those wishes. And so the subjectivity is being objectively manifest in the creation of goods, basically. And that's what Bitcoin is making. Again, it's making that market process more pure in a way. And so what is Bitcoin? Well, it's the perfection of private property, which is the perfection of price discovery, which leads to the perfection of political freedom. And so it's, again, unbridling capitalism, more free market, etc. And so this conclusion by the alchemists that Christ needed to be imitated or acted out rather than merely worshipped in some abstract sense. And Bitcoin is incentivizing us to do that again, right? It's meeting Christ on the plane that transcends imitation. And I think you would call that incentives, basically. And so love God above all else, love thy neighbor as thyself. Again, if we understand God as this philosophical amalgam of the known, the unknown, and the process that mediates between the two, then we're talking about the same thing ultimately, right? Like, it's like the sanctity of the individual is God. Like, and that's, what does it say in the Bible? Christ is God. They are the same, but they're not the same, right? It's a paradox because the individual human is not the known, the unknown, and the process that mediates between them, but he also is. Like, so with that, I mean, there's another section here that I don't guess we're gonna have time to get into, but I would just conclude with one quote from Carl Jung that obviously informs a lot of Peterson's writing. Carl Jung wrote that the individual is the only reality. The further we move away from the individual toward abstract ideas about Homo sapiens, the more likely we are to fall into error, unquote. And if I had to put all of Mises's work and all of Jordan Peterson's work and all of other authors, right, Robert Pirsig's work, into one sentence, I think that would be it. It's that the individual is the ultimate reality. And if we take that idea seriously, then we can create the closest thing to an ideal world that we know of.
I love it. I don't have really much to add to it. I think that's a incredibly poignant final quote. The antidote for the corruption of the world. I love that analogy for Bitcoin. And so, yeah, Bitcoin as the ultimate aim, the tool, the agent of transformation that lets us get to the primacy of the individual. I love it. It's I think that's incredibly poignant, and it's fantastic to see that at the end of this book. So I think this alchemy section has been a trip, as we as we alluded to last time, and we knew was coming. It's taken us a while to get here, but at the end, the Bitcoin of it all, it's just shining through. So yeah, this has been a lot of fun digging into this alchemy section.
Couldn't agree more. And anyone that's listening to this, I hope you take this as an inspiration to get your act together, because that's what we all need to do to fix the world.